Hello and welcome to the DIY Affiliates and Collective Soul Journey. In today's video, we are talking about scripting, a manifestation journal using theta waves, the abundant sound wave subconscious manifesting. You will need the following tools: a quiet place where you can meditate, sage or Palo Santo or dragon bloods incense to cleanse yourself and your space, a journal, a paper or book, something to write with, clear quartz, carnelian, rose quartz, amethyst to help you manifest. I discovered an algorithm for manifesting a desired outcome when I was writing my second book. I learned how to tap into and flow with the laws that govern universal energy, along with the belief and visualizing of my manifestation, then feeling grateful for everything in my life, including my manifestation, and then the inspired action or writing my manifestation down or scripting my manifestation, just the same way as you would write a book. The algorithm worked for me to reach my desired outcome of being an author. The algorithm worked for me to reach my desired outcome of being an author with 3 books and 2 more on the way to production at the Kindle Direct publishing platform. So what is an algorithm, you may be asking? An algorithm is a step-by-step procedure or formula for solving a problem or accomplishing some end. It is like a recipe containing a set of instructions that need to be followed in a specific order to achieve a desired outcome. The very next step that we need to do is to get into the right frequencies. So you can open your healing app to binaural beats and choose the low theta at 4 hertz. Make sure that you have headphones on, and this will help you to connect the both parts of your brain and help you to move up to another level of consciousness and put you in a daydream state, just the same as when you are falling asleep or just waking up. This is like your last conscious moment before you drift off into the world of unlimited possibilities. The conscious mind is mostly under the control of the ego. The ego part of the mind is now letting go of its conscious control. The subconscious part of the mind takes over and you are drifting just like a daydream. But the difference is this is in your mind's eye. Understanding that there are laws that rule over universal energy is important to relate and resonate with this meditation. We are all interconnected, and our thoughts, actions, and beliefs have an impact on the collective consciousness. Now, you can skip this part if you like, but here is a detailed description of the laws that I tap into in the algorithm and how they affect our daily lives. Are you listening to the theta waves? This is what is preparing you for the upcoming meditation. I believe knowledge is power, and this is fueled by emotion, energy in motion. Just the same as the physical laws that we follow, there are laws that control the universal energies. And these are the laws that we are tapping into and flowing with. These are the energies that we are creating within us and around us. The first law is a fundamental law, which is called the law of Divine Oneness. And it says that everything in the universe is connected. We are all interconnected. And everyone's thoughts, actions, and beliefs have an impact on the collective consciousness. This law reflects unity and interconnectedness of all beings and the universe. It says that even though we are all part of a larger whole, that our actions have ripple effects beyond what we may immediately perceive. The law of vibration. This is a law that establishes that everything in the universe is in a constant state of motion and vibration. This law says that every particle and atom within existence, including you, is in a continuous state of movement, and each object, thought, and emotion has its unique vibrational frequency. According to this law, everything we experience in our physical reality is a result of different vibrations. Our thoughts, feelings, and actions emit energetic vibrations that attract similar vibrations from the universe. Therefore, by maintaining a positive, high vibration, we can attract positive outcomes and experiences into our life. And then this leads us into the law of attraction. The law of attraction is a belief that positive or negative thoughts bring positive or negative experiences into a person's life. By focusing on positive or negative thoughts, one can bring about positive or negative results. This law says that like attracts like, and that one's thoughts and intentions can manifest into reality. Most people believe that visualizing their goals and maintaining a positive mindset will attract success, happiness, and other desired outcomes into their life. Now, this is also a law that is highly associated with manifestation, visualization, and the power of intention. But it's not just about the law of attraction. The law of gratitude is very important and is based on the precept of being thankful and appreciative for what you already have in your life. Focusing on the positive aspects and acknowledging the blessings and abundance that are already present, no matter how small they may seem. By expressing gratitude, one can attract more positive energy and experiences into their life. When it comes to the other universal laws, such as the law of attraction and the law of gratitude, can play a significant role by feeling grateful for what already has, and you are more likely to attract more positive things into your life. Gratitude helps to shift your focus from lack to abundance. Gratitude will help you to align with the energy of receiving more blessings and opportunity. The law of gratitude works with the other universal laws by promoting a positive mindset, attracting good energy, and establishing a cycle of abundance and positivity. When you learn how to practice gratitude, you can also align with the law of cause and effect. The law of cause and effect states that with every action, there is a corresponding reaction. By showing appreciation and thanks for the good things in life, you can set a new cycle of positivity in motion, leading to more positive outcomes in the future. Now, the law of cause and effect is what you may call karma, but it's also known as the principle of causality. And it states that every cause has an effect and every effect has a cause. This then says that nothing happens by chance and that every action or event has a specific and predictable outcome based on the conditions that preceded it. In the framework of the laws that govern universal energy, the law of cause and effect plays a significant role. It is interconnected with the other universal laws, such as the law of attraction, the law of vibration, and the law of perpetual transmutation of energy. The law of cause and effect explains that the energy we emit through our thoughts, feelings, and actions will attract similar energy back to us. And this aligns closely with the law of attraction, which suggests that like attracts like. In essence, the energy we are putting out to the universe will influence the circumstances and experiences we attract back in our life. The law of cause and effect operates in conjunction with the law of vibration, which states that everything in the universe is in constant state of motion and vibrates at a particular frequency. Our thoughts and emotions also carry their own energetic vibrations, and by understanding this, we can consciously raise our vibration to attract more positive outcomes. The law of cause and effect serves as a principle that works in harmony with other universal laws to shape our experiences and reality based on the energy we project into this world. This law says that there is unity and interconnectedness of all beings in the universe. This is another law that governs universal energy, and I found this on Google recently. This law says that energy is always in a state of flux and can be transformed from one form to another. By being aware of the energy we emit and understanding the interconnectedness of these other universal laws, we can consciously direct our energy towards creating the reality that we desire. We are all part of a larger whole universe, and the actions we create today will ripple in a way past what you can perceive at this present moment. We are creating a deep spiritual connection to each other and the universe. We are flowing with the law of divine oneness. We are all connected to everything and everybody. There is nothing that we are not connected to. Feel the connection to the universe through this video. We are starting to create a path in which our vibrational energy signature will follow into the quantum field to find the exact same vibrational energy signature to connect with and create a reaction that will ripple back into our reality. Remember, perception is reality. Your perception is your reality. My perception is my reality. Change your perception, change your reality. If you cannot perceive it, you cannot manifest it. Our bodies are light and energy and are composed of atoms, which are composed and consist of smaller particles like protons, neutrons, and electrons. According to modern physics, these subatomic particles exhibit properties of both matter and waves, which is energy. Light itself is also a form of energy that behaves as a wave. While we can explain our physical existence through energy and light, being human is more than just the physical. We have consciousness, emotions, thoughts, and the sense of self that goes beyond the sum of our physical parts. He have created the energy. And the other part of the algorithm is believing, visualizing, feeling, doing an inspired action, and this will help you to manifest whatever is your desire into your life. Now it's time to step into the manifestation. Are you ready? Are you listening to the 4 hertz theta sound waves through the healing app? If you have not downloaded this app, then please download this app and start listening to it. Make sure you have your headphones in or your earbuds in. Here is the guided meditation for creating a manifestation journal. Step 1, find a quiet space. Find a quiet space where you will not be disturbed and you can put your full focus on this meditation and manifesting your desires. Step 2, cleansing your space. Cleanse yourself and your space with sage or Palo Santo or dragon blood or another incense stick that you may have. Make sure to take care not to burn yourself or anything around your space. There are crystals that are best known for manifesting, such as clear quartz, known as the master manifester, for its amplifying properties. This will help you to clarify your desires and amplify your intentions. Citrine. This is nicknamed the abundant stone for its association with attracting prosperity and success and abundance into your life. Amethyst. This is seen as a stone of intuition and spiritual connection. This will help you tap into your inner wisdom and align your desires with your highest good. Rose quartz. This is known as a love stone for attracting love and relationships, but it also can be used for manifesting self-love, compassion, and empathy. Carnelian, known as a motivation stone for its fiery energy. It can help you to take action and overcome challenges towards your goals. If you have these crystals, then use these crystals. If you have other crystals, you can also use other crystals. You can wear the crystals as a pendant or hold the crystals up to around your heart or your third eye, or place the crystals around your space. Focus on energizing these crystals to help to cleanse the energy and invite the crystals' properties to influence the meditation. Step 3, close your eyes, breathing, and try to relax. Close your eyes and take 5 slow breaths. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. Remember, it is important to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, very slowly, to help you relax your mind and your body in preparation for the next step. Step 4, creating the energies around with powerful affirmations. We are going to create the right energies and frequencies for a manifestation by repeating 10 powerful affirmations. Repeat the following affirmations while you are listening to the theta waves 4 hertz, or if you are used to listening to theta waves, you can listen to the mid theta or the high theta. To begin, repeat after me. I am worthy. I am enough. I am capable. I deserve happiness. I trust the journey of my life. I am strong. I choose to be happy. I am grateful for all that I have. I am loved. I am in control of my thoughts and emotions. You can also listen to this video in the top right-hand corner. Step 4, thinking and scripting your manifestations. We are preparing the screenplay in our mind's eye of our manifestations. Step 5, your manifestation journal. Get your journal or papers ready to write and something to write with. Give your journal a name. My journal is called Manifestations of My Life's Journey. Here you are going to write what you want to manifest and draw into your life. This is called scripting. Are you still listening to Theta 4 Hertz binaural beats with headphones on? This is important to help you to manifest while you are scripting. I will be giving you suggestions, and you can write everything down that flows through your mind. Keep listening to the theta sound wave and think about what it is, what are your intentions for your life. I will give you some ideas to think about to inspire you to a higher level of unlimited thinking. This is not limited or any negative thinking or negative cycles or negative patterns. When you are scripting the intentions for manifestations, make sure to answer the questions of who, what, where, why, and when. The 5 W's are the key to your focus. Write everything that comes to your mind. Always make sure to answer all of the questions in your script. You are creating the script for your life, just like a play. Write everything down to the smallest detail in your manifestation journal. Follow the flow of your thoughts as they settle into focus on each word, as each word carries a vibration, and this is the vibration you are sending out to the universe with gratitude. Now we are flowing with the law of gratitude, and this is how the law of attraction works, by creating magnification of your positive thoughts and emotions, thus attracting more abundance into your life. You are tapping into the heart chakra energy, opening your heart chakra to create the magnetic heart energy and allowing your intuition to flow through your subconscious mind. What do you truly desire? To open your heart and allow yourself to fully receive and give unconditional love, feeling more balanced and connected, and reaching a higher vibrational level of existence. You will be able to see your intentions in your mind's eye come to life. Intentions for love, for your love life. See what you want to manifest. Intentions for your health, body, mind, and spirit to manifest. Intentions for wealth and abundance, what you want to have and what you desire in your life. Now let's do a little mini exercise to manifest money into your bank account, because money is energy too. So do this little exercise with me as you are thinking about what you are scripting into your manifestation journal. Think of a number you would like to manifest into your account. For example, 10,000. Can you see your bank account either online or in a book? Picture the number you have chosen in your bank account. See this number. See your bank account, whether it be online or you're looking at it in a bank book or you're looking at it on any device. See the number as it appears in your bank account. This is your manifestation seed. When you can see the number in your bank account, how do you feel? How would you feel if you had this money in your bank account right now? How would you feel? Would you feel grateful? Because this is real. This is happening right now. But it is also happening in the quantum field. You cannot manifest what you cannot perceive. If you cannot see the number in your bank account, you cannot manifest this into your life. So let's do this little exercise. You go to your bank app, you look at your account, and there is that number that you have manifested. The more you use your subconscious influence on the quantum field for manifesting, the more abundance is added to what you already have. How do you feel? How do you feel to have this amount of money, energy, and money in your bank account? Feeling grateful, feeling thankful, amazing, and of course smiling with the joy of abundance. This is now your dominant emotion that you have created. And this is what you are projecting out to the universe at this present moment. Also, intentions for a business creation, an image of a business you want, and also make sure to answer the 5 W's. Who are you with? What are you doing? Where is a business? Why does a business exist? And when does a business exist? Down to the smallest detail. Be specific. Think, if you could have anything in your life, what would it be? Make sure to answer the 5 W's. Who, what, where, when, and why. Think now about what you want, and you are leaving and manifesting all the negative patterns, think of your aspirations, or and karmic cycles. The sky is not the limit. The universe is not the limit. There are no limits as you walk through the door on this negative energy. A door is opening to the quantum field, and you are leaving the quantum field. More positive, more connected, more intuitive. The universe is allowing you to step through the door into your new reality. What is it that you see as you walk through the door? And make sure to close the door to all of the negative influences. What do you see as you walk through the door? As you're entering the quantum field, this is a world of energy, frequencies, and vibrations, where the manifesting in your inner world is taking place. Your subconscious mind is now opening other doors. Other opportunities are presenting themselves and aligning with your ideal life manifestations. You are breaking through the subconscious mind and allowing the Theta binaural beats to flow through your brain. You are manifesting. You are in the zone. And you are on your way to becoming a master manifester. Step 6, belief. Do you believe in your manifestations? Do you believe down to your soul what you are manifesting into your life is happening right now? Feeling the emotions of believing and the gratitude of believing that something that is beyond your current perception but is there in the quantum field is happening at this present moment. This is another dimension where what you have written down is happening and has already happened, and the belief in the manifestation is a crucial element of the algorithm for manifesting a desired outcome. Have you started to really focus your intentions, dreams, desires, everything that you have scripted? Have you started to visualize your deepest desires where there is no limit? This is unlimited thinking where everything and anything is possible. Once you get by the gatekeeper of the mind, the ego needs to be quieted and cannot create any illusions and limit our conscious mind to only what is perceived as our reality. We are standing in our reality. We are standing in our manifestations. We are a part of our manifestations. Allow yourself to bypass the ego and enter the subconscious of your mind. Now you are reaching another level of consciousness and are starting to be a conscious creator with the universe. We are manifesting every second of our life. Why not direct our focus to what we really desire and manifest into our life? Step 7, our vibration. Now you are tuned into the right vibrational frequencies. You are visualizing your script, your intentions, your wishes, and your manifestations, what you desire to see in your life. You are starting to align and get on the right track to your desires. In your mind's eye, picture your journal, your manifestation journal. Now picture opening it up. What did you write? Are you still listening to the Theta brainwave? Now visualize the words that you have written down in your manifestation journal. Watch as the words come alive and start creating images down to the smallest detail. Focus on the images. The manifestation is happening now. Feel the emotions of gratitude, love, happiness. Smile, keep smiling, feeling the emotions of gratitude wash over you for what you want to manifest into your life. See your manifestation as if it is happening right now, right at this very moment. It is so real, you just reach out, you can touch it. Now in your mind's eye, put yourself in the picture. Step out of your current reality into your new reality. What are you seeing? What are you wearing? What do you smell? Watch your script as it comes to life all around you. You can see every word as it's turned into an image, as the image turns into a moving picture, and as the moving picture turns into your manifestation. You are part of it. Step 8, this is very important. Feeling. How do you feel? One of the most important things is to feel the emotions of gratitude. Because the emotions of love, gratitude, happiness, and joy are the emotions that will create the energy, the high energy frequency that you are sending out to the universe, that will create an attraction through the law of attraction that will be pulled back to you in your reality. Our emotions carry vibrations, and when we are tapping into the law of vibration, and these vibrations carry frequencies. If you think in terms of energy and frequency, then we are raising our vibrational frequency to match the emotional frequency of love and above, which is 420 hertz and above. Now we are tapping into the law of gratitude, starting to magnetize our manifestations through the law of attraction. We are also creating a cause through the law of cause and effect, and this is being sent as an energetic frequency to the quantum field, looking for the exact same match to manifest back into your life. We are manifesting every second and every minute of our lives to become aware of emotions and actions and what we are creating to manifest back to us. We are manifesting every second and every minute of our lives to become aware of the emotions and actions and what we are creating to manifest back to us. As you grow in spirituality, you will start to trust your intuition. You will become more magnetic, and manifesting will become easier for you. Step 9 is action. This is why scripting the manifestation journal is so important, because it adds another layer to the density of your manifestation, where it's not just thought. It becomes action. It becomes an inspired action. Any step you take towards your manifestation, such as your script, putting it in a place where you always have your awareness on it and you will see it at all times. You can also take a post-it note and stick parts of your manifestations around your house, on the door of your bathroom, where you can see it all the time. You can write it on a chalkboard, put it on a wall, put your manifestations on the fridge with a magnet, carry your manifestation journal around with you to add to it at any time. Step 10 is to speak into existence. And this is another inspired action. Use your voice vibrations and your throat chakra to speak into existence your scripted manifestations, sending this out to the universe to manifest what it is you desire into your life. Repeat everything you have created in your manifestation journal while focusing on the script coming alive in the inner reality to manifest it into your outer reality. Feeling gratitude for everything in the universe is bringing to you. Nothing happens by coincidence or chance. If you are ready for the shift in consciousness and to manifest what you crave in your life, this video will help you to take the first step towards your ascension as a soul and increase manifestations and intuitions. Try to spend at least 30 minutes on a focused manifestation a day, 3 times a day, in the morning, the afternoon. I would aim for the synchronicity in numbers, as in 12, 12, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, or 3, 3, 3. And don't forget about the special times that your brain is in Theta, which is in the morning when you're first waking up and in the evening when you're first falling asleep. Thank you for being a loyal subscriber and allowing me to share my knowledge with you to help you to grow in spirit and connect with your angels, your higher self, and the universe. Thank you for being a loyal reader. Leave me a comment so I can go and check out your stories and your channel and return the favor.